Welcome to the Gruber Morning Show. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good morning and welcome, everybody.
We have a bunch of news items for you today. As always, feel free to chime in. Let us know where you're coming in from. And if you are watching this after the live broadcast and you have a question, either post it on the live podcast on our YouTube channel or feel free to email us at ev@gruber.com if it requires a bit more.
You know, and the fact that it's been, this will be the first time in 3 weeks that we haven't had a podcast guest or getting back to the news. There's a lot that's happened in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, it seems to be exponentially growing. We do a Wednesday AI podcast, and there's no shortage of material. It's so now that you have to prioritize and you throw away a bunch of stuff typically that you'd love to talk about, but
Yep.
there's more relevant things. The backdrop behind us is, of course, a supercharger. And did you get this off AI, Jesse, or is this a actual photograph?
I'm not sure. I found it on Google Images.
Okay, all right. Looks great, by the way. Here we are in front of the supercharger. So the first bit of news is SpaceX is continuing its retail push, apparently, by expanding Starlink to Target stores. A listing for SpaceX's newest version 4 Starlink dish popped up on the Target.com for $599, that is. The standard price. Those who buy it can then activate their dish and sign up for a residential or a roam plan. This was spotted on Target earlier this month, but it wasn't clear if the sales were legit. At the time, the official Starlink.com site made no mention of Target being an official reseller for the satellite internet system. But SpaceX and Target didn't comment on the sales when they reached out to them. This particular article, I think, was Business Insider. But SpaceX has since updated Starlink.com to mention the retail availability through Target.com. Now, there are some others, apparently, that have been selling the Starlink product.
Yeah.
The other U.S. retailers they mention are Best Buy, Home Depot, and temporarily Costco. I wonder what happened there.
Well, Costco is as a large retailer has a tendency to bring in a batch of goods on a single purchase, and then they once they sell out, they're done for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed though that in the Business Insider article that Starlink has quietly grown to 2.7 million subscribers.
Really?
And that's an increase of almost 500,000 subscribers in the first quarter. I did a little bit of math because it's $120 for residential, $150 for the roaming. If it's a 50-50 split, that is almost $4.3 billion a year in revenue.
Okay.
So you think of it as this, kind of nothing thing, but
Right.
when it comes to being as an internet service provider, they're one of the major players in the United States now, and it seems like they're just flying under the radar.
Yeah. Of course, what we don't have, at least in this broadcast, is the amount of infrastructure costs involved with launching a satellite, creating one.
Correct.
The fuel, the rockets, all of that. Although Elon is using reusable rockets, that changed the whole landscape of space travel quite a bit.
Well, not only the reusable rockets, when he does his launch, he puts a couple of dozen satellites up at once as well.
That's true. Yeah, you've seen that there's a string of them.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff. Another article here before we get some questions and people chiming in. Tesla is now blaming affordable hybrid cars for stealing its EV sales. And this is according to a article from the Businessman. So they're saying that the popularity of hybrids, stating that inexpensive hybrid cars are drawing green car shoppers away from electric vehicles. You think that's possible?
I do think that's possible. It's part of the, I like to think of it as part of a bigger picture, a movement toward green.
Mhm.
A few years back, I would have been much more comfortable buying a hybrid than an EV. Then I got my Kia Soul. I realized how good a true electric vehicle would be, and it's been that from then on.
Right.
I think this is, there are a few reasons why hybrids are kind of having their day in the sun, as it were. I've even heard it online called a craze, that's the next fad or next big thing. EV infrastructure still does lag behind fossil fuel infrastructure. But we got to
Mhm.
admit that it's being
Yeah.
built out rapidly, but it's just not there yet. The plug-in hybrid EVs are typically cars that'll have anywhere from 30 to as much as 60 or 70 miles of range in their battery.
Mhm.
And then obviously they take over with the ICE engine. Well, these that means that these plug-in hybrids oftentimes have a range that can rival the range of the best EVs and yet have a cost that's near the lowest end EVs that have short range.
Mhm. Okay.
And so the PHEVs give people that want to go green this kind of warm fuzzy feeling that yeah they're going green, but they're not really.
Right.
They still have their ICE engine, and so they don't sacrifice that convenience. At some point in the future, somebody's going to come up with a less expensive and highly reliable electric vehicle. I think we've got the reliability down in the EV space now.
Mhm.
It's just the expense. And eventually I think it's all part of that big S curve. This is the flattening of that we're going through the flat portion of the EV. A product will come out, maybe it's already out, that will begin to spike that demand on the EV. And within a few years, I don't think we'll be looking at hybrids at all.
And then, of course, you have the other component, which is increased maintenance costs. Because remember, folks, with that hybrid, you've got two drivetrains. You've got the EV drivetrain, you've got the ICE. And you're right back to oil changes and spark plugs and alternators and, whatever else, belts and all of that that goes along with it. So brace yourself because that hybrid up front may look attractive, but once you start getting the maintenance bills, it's going to lose some of its luster. And then the final thing that I find humorous, we've been poking fun at the Italian exotics, the Ferraris and Lamborghinis who aren't quite ready yet to dip their toes completely in the water and go EV, and they're going the hybrid route.
Yeah.
And as we know, having worked on some of these hybrids, the amount of stuff that they have to cram into a car to make it a hybrid, an Italian sports car,
Yeah.
is just creates a service nightmare. There's very little space left after all the plumbing is in and the ice stuff is in. And, the LaFerrari, for example, there's a V12 in there, along with an electric drivetrain. And
It's like, how do they do it?
it's a miracle of engineering, but it's an extraordinarily expensive maintenance proposition after you own the car.
Absolutely. And again, you at one point drove a Toyota Prius.
Mhm.
And isn't it driving that hybrid that helped lead you toward the EV?
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
And it's the same with me. We wanted to go hybrid. We ended up going straight to the Kia Soul. It's a commuter car. It had 100 miles of range. And we're like, this is great. We'll never go back. As more people drive hybrids, they'll see that they still have the disadvantages of the fossil fuel, and they will also see what the advantages of having a battery are, and they'll get used to the idea of, wow, I could just take my car home at night, plug it in, and it's always ready to go the next morning.
Yeah.
Why didn't I go electric?
Right.
And I think that's going to be the question people are asking in about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it was amazing. The around 2000 or so, I think it was, year 2000, that Prius that we bought, at the time, gas prices were high and looking at 50 miles a gallon. Wow, much better than my muscle cars that were getting 10 miles to the gallon and spitting gasoline out the tailpipe. But they weren't our daily drivers, fortunately. But it was a paradigm shift, recognizing that you could actually propel yourself in a vehicle up to 30 miles an hour for about a mile on an electric motor. And that's really what generated my passion and interest for BEVs, full, battery electric vehicles.
Yep.
We've got a comment from Ronald Lecter, and it looks like, or Lect4, it looks like he's responding to the Starlink piece that we had just a few minutes ago. He says, I'm more interested in the buyback of unused or deactivated Starlinks and the resale of the Starlink terminals at a discount. When Starlink gets $50 a month and offers free installation and free terminal, just like what happened to Dish Network as it took off in the 2000s, their 2010s, it is totally possible.
Yeah, I agree with Ronald. I think it is totally possible. Right now, I think Starlink is still in that startup mode, but any kind of high-speed internet that you can reliably take absolutely anywhere. You can take
Yeah.
Starlink down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and it works just as fast as anywhere else. There's an inherent advantage to that, and I think it's a good business opportunity.
hmm It just needs to reach critical mass and become wildly popular. And I can also see that it will eventually replace all of the connected versions that we have on the planet now.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a chart that we'd like to throw up here, Jesse. It's called Battery Failure Chart. And this shows from 2011 through 2023 the percentage of EV battery failures. And it's not isolated to just Tesla, apparently. Unfortunately, this chart just kind of showed up on social media. We don't know the origin. We don't know who generated. And but there are some interesting trends that are displayed here. If you take a look at the amount of failures in 2011 at 7.5% down to 0.1% in 2023, that's of course a significant drop.
It is a significant drop, and and it is I will admit to start with, it's kind of a head scratcher. You've got some brands like the Chevy Bolt in 2018 had their huge battery recall, where
Right.
they've recalled virtually all Chevy Bolts made in 2018, 2019, and 2020. But you look at the failure rates on those overall, and those are in the 0.4 down to 0.1% rates.
hmm
Another thing that this doesn't take into account is Gruber Motors.
Right.
And here's what I mean. EV repair shops, whether it's your dealer, whether it's one of the very few independent shops that are out there, they tend to consider a high voltage battery a black box. And what that means is if there's anything wrong with the battery itself, they're simply going to come to the driver and they're going to say, the car owner, and they're going to say, well, they got a problem with the battery, so we're going to have to replace it.
hmm
They never talk about trying to fix the high voltage system itself. And that's where we at Gruber Motors stand apart and stand different. We're doing it obviously with the Roadsters all the time, and we're starting to do it more with the Model S's as well.
hmm
Where other people have no heartburn about the later versions of the Model Y or Model 3 batteries that have all of that foam in them and seem to be non-repairable, we have great heartburn over that because we think, well, these batteries could be repaired if we can get into them.
hmm
But the way that they're structured as a structural battery pack, we don't know if we'll be able to in the future.
Built as a throwaway item, and it seemed to be heading more that direction, unless companies like us can innovate and find ways to enter those battery packs. And, the fundamental reason that the service delivery systems for EVs do not include repairing main propulsion batteries is the amount of logistics involved. Those things are 1,200 pounds. You have to manipulate them. You have to open them up. You have to then have specialized test equipment, the type of skills and equipment that most service centers don't have, or staff that have engineering backgrounds. We're talking about low-tech mechanic type shops that typically work on suspension, brakes, tires, that sort of thing. And they'll get into some electronics, but it's all module swapping.
Right.
You don't dive down into that electronic module and right down to component level. So that's where independent shops like us shine, is that we're able to actually repair rather than throw away a $22,000 battery pack. And when we first started this in 2014, there really weren't any companies like us around. But now, with the amount of supply that's available for business, the shops are beginning to proliferate, and we watch many of them evolving expertise as they go. They're getting pretty good at this.
Yeah, they definitely are. And, it's now I still haven't heard of many shops that have realized that there are similarities between the high voltage battery system and other stationary power systems. But we found that out end of 2015, beginning of 2016, as we were taking apart our first battery packs and realizing, oh, gee, this is just a UPS on wheels.
Right. Yeah. Very true. So some of the comments with this chart, by the way, are interesting. First one was, any source? Question mark. Unfortunately, we don't have that. And then he says everyone can create a few charts. Good point. Another one is, what's the average miles per kilometer or a kilometer life of a Tesla battery these days? He has a 2020 Model 3 with 200,000 kilometers. There's some statistics available, but we don't have those with us today.
Right.
Another one is, I know of someone that had a Ford Explorer, brand new, 60,000 miles, and the transmission broke.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that if you got 90 to 110,000 miles out of a transmission, you felt pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is at a time when a new car might have been $12,000 and you were still looking at a $2,000 transmission repair.
And there's a similarity there again in transmission shops. Remember, when you took your car to the dealer, they would swap your transmission. They didn't have a full-fledged transmission rebuilding operation there.
That's right.
But you had a lot of independent shops that were willing to open up that transmission and repair what was wrong with it.
Well, and a lot of independent shops not only figured out the base, the transmission falling apart type of thing, they would be able to retrofit the transmission with newly engineered parts to solve the underlying problems that caused the transmission to fail in the first place.
Good point.
And
Yeah.
so your 80,000 mile transmission, once it gets rebuilt, could maybe last 120 or 130,000 miles the second time around.
And then the final comment on this chart that we brought was, this chart may just indicate that they fail over time. Of course, a 2023 battery does not fail. It's new. So that 2023 entry there is a bit skewed.
Yeah, and the 2021 and 2022 entries, I would say they're a bit skewed as well, because that's when the recalls began to happen with the Chevy Bolt and the Nissan Leafs. So I think that again, we just don't have enough data behind the chart.
Yeah.
It does give us the overall sense, though. Batteries are highly, highly reliable. And that's not what most people think of.
And getting more so as the designs improve. I mean, anything that, that's how free market works. You have enough demand and innovation comes into play, and better engineering, and it evolves. Here's an interesting comment from K.A. Panda. He said, where is Gruber? We're in Phoenix, Arizona, by the way, Gruber Motor Company. What state and city? And then, guys, he says, not the best mechanics, but most mechanics don't fix the high-tech ICVs. Just replace, and there's a shortage of master mechanics. There's additional wisdom in that comment. The ICE world, a master mechanic could successfully repair the majority of problems. With EVs, it's a different animal. You now need 3 distinct skills, which are not usually inherent in a master mechanic, somebody with decades of experience working on mechanical items, or with the accreditations as a mechanic. What you need is software expertise. You need electronics expertise, how to use oscilloscopes, read DVMs, and work in identify components. And the third one is you need the mechanical skills. So it's very difficult in the world of EVs to find people that are able to do all 3. And that's why the service centers typically focus on mechanical issues, low-tech auto, paint, body, brakes, and all the mechanical items.
Yeah, and I really like Panda's point. Most mechanics don't fix the high-tech internal combustion vehicles. It's only the master mechanics that do. Most of them throw away the parts on the regular vehicles as well, or on the ICE vehicles as well. It's only the master mechanics, of which there's a chronic shortage, that can go in and do the mechanical repairs. And we're talking about the same thing in the EV space.
Right. Do you want to grab Niels's
question? Niels has joined us. Good morning, Niels. Glad to have you here. And he says regulators ought to enforce repairability of EVs and any equipment, really. I couldn't agree more with that. The right to repair, I think, is an extremely important right. It is being both fought out and litigated in the farm equipment area, probably more than any other. But it's a larger one than just the farm equipment. He also says, did you get those silver options?
I did not.
I haven't gotten the silver options as of yet, but I've heard that silver might be going might be
Might be going up.
going up. Big changes in it. Don't know. I don't know enough about it. I don't keep up on it, and so I try to not invest too much in what I don't know.
Niels, I think I've shared this with you. I did that in the 70s when the Nelson Bunker Hunt brothers were cornering the silver market, and I got stung badly with options. So it's not anything I'm comfortable with this late in the game,
Sure.
even. KA Panda, thanks. 3x, 3 times skills. Wow, a major paradigm shift. Almost like the work could be an IT consulting company. Yeah, good point.
You know, in a lot of ways it could.
Yeah.
If half of the people at Gruber Motors were specialty in IT and electronics, actually, we're pretty close to that, aren't we?
Yeah.
About half of our guys are more of an IT and electronics background than they are a mechanical background.
They are. The majority are engineers these days.
Yeah.
And the engineers work both in the labs and go out on the floor and work on the cars. So, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be able to do that.
And then Ronald Lecter has joined us, and he says, LOL, Top Speed just criticized the Tesla Model 3 performance for lacking fake engine sounds and a manual transmission. Guess who has Stellantis paying them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy, yeah, for sure.
Weren't there some federal mandates that sound on EVs were going to be mandatory at some point in the future?
I do think that that's going to happen at some point in the future. Don't have a lot of information on that yet.
Yeah. Neil says, I'll hang on to my 1988 Mercedes and see what EVs look like in 5 or 10 years. Except EU is now talking about outlawing repair of vehicles older than 15 years. They are mad. I fully agree.
Oh my gosh, I totally agree with that. That's crazy.
Where this legislation comes from is just a mystery. It's a head shaker.
Yeah.
All right, got another news item here. This one is Tesla updates future vehicle lineup, and it will arrive sooner than expected. This is a Tesla Roddy article. But what they're saying here is that Tesla's updated the future vehicle lineup to accelerate the launch of new models ahead of previously communicated start of production in the second half of 2025. They feel that these new vehicles will blend aspects of the next generation platform with elements of the current platform, so they can be produced on the same lines that the current Model S, 3, and X and Y lineup is built on, which of course will alleviate investor concerns regarding potential delays due to line upgrades. Those are shutdowns typically, yeah, and costly.
It's very interesting to hear Elon talk about the car building of the future, because he's talked about going away from the assembly line, which has been a staple since Henry Ford put it in the early 1900s. And instead, because of the gigacasting, the single large casted parts, and only having tens of parts to assemble instead of thousands of parts to assemble, he says it just doesn't make as much sense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it would also afford a company like Tesla the flexibility of having multiple models in the same workspace, where literally one day you could be working on a Model 3, the next day you could be working on a Model S, the next day after that you could be working on the new rumored Model 2.
And they just changed the molds on the gigacasting machine for that day.
Yeah, somewhere down the line, the gigacasting molds have been changed, and the workers know how to build all three.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
You know, I also think that this is, remember what I said a few minutes ago? At some point, somebody's going to come up with a good quality, less expensive EV, and it's going to take off that S curve again.
Right.
I think this might be it.
Interesting.
That's just my take. But, you know, Tesla is talking about accelerating the development of their Model 2, which they've been advertising as that $25,000 car. The $25,000 car is what people are waiting for.
Yeah. Got another image to throw up here, Jesse. It is the BYD Super 9 sports car. And the article here claims, after beating Tesla last year to claim the title as the world's top EV maker, BYD unveiled the U8 and U9, and they're both impressive, but for different reasons. This is the U9, by the way. It's a supercar that is allegedly faster than the Bugatti Chiron and can literally dance. I didn't get a lot of detail about how it's going to do that. But the strangest thing about this car is that it has no windshield. They talk about a unique cabin design. Well, it's got to be really unique unless you sit so low that, the wind isn't going to affect you. And we were unable to, for this a podcast, determine how they get away without a windshield on a car that's most likely capable of doing 200 miles an hour plus.
Yeah, it says their top speed is 308 kilometers an hour, and that equates to about 188 miles an hour top speed. Those rises in front of the two seats, it reminds me of a motorcycle windshield.
Yeah.
Where there's just enough there to
deflect
the wind above the person who's sitting there. But anybody who is too tall, and I'm thinking my height too tall, or sits too high on the seat, they're going to get a blast of wind in the face, and they're going to have a hard time being able to drive.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful car.
Well, it's fascinating because most likely the designers have answered all of those questions we just posed, and it's going to be fun to see this thing actually go into production and do some road testing with it. And the BYD Super 8, by the way, is an SUV, and that's why we didn't mention that much, because it's not quite as exciting as this particular car here with the gull-wing doors.
Where would the hinges be on that gull-wing door, since there is no, usually a gull-wing door, you have a hinge in the roof so that the door can fold up.
Yep.
And here you'd have no roof either.
Yeah, it says no windshield and gull-wing doors, so we'll see how that actually plays out. And they talk about 2 carbon fiber seats. Well, they say no surprises there. But they are not fitted one next to each other because they're physically separated by a tunnel that's integrated into the body of the car.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, there's no mention of power or performance, but it's fair to assume that it won't be slow. And BYD didn't say anything about pricing either, but it'll likely be in line with some of its European rivals. So
I did some looking up on this and have some potential estimates. Pricing in the $230,000 range or so. They were saying 1.8 to 2 million yuan, which is around that equivalent. Top speed around 188 miles. 0 to 60, or the 0 to 100 kilometer, about 2.3 to 2.4 seconds.
Okay.
So, which makes it faster than almost any car out on the marketplace.
Except for Tesla.
Except for, you've got the Tesla Plaid, you've got the Lucid Sapphire, and you have the Rivian, Rimac Nevera, not the Rivian, the Rimac Nevera. Those are 3 that I can think of off the top of my head that would be faster. But it's an impressive looking car. It'll be. Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing a BYD for the first time in person. Who knows when or if that will happen, considering the political climate between the U.S.
K.A. Panda says, my niece's old toy Corolla was blocked from entry in some French cities due to emissions, forcing a rethink of transportation choices. Not a bad thing.
Okay.
You know, I used to detest going down to emission testing with my ICE cars because there were long lines, typically. And for some reason, all of my plates expired in the middle of summer here when it's 115 out, right? And you really don't want to run that air conditioning. In my muscle cars, I didn't have any anyway. Yeah, so I'm sitting there with a big Block 8 headers that glow cherry red at night when you really get on the car. And all of that heat buildup, not just from the asphalt, but from the engine coming through the firewall. And then, of course, the ambient, which is 115 in Phoenix.
Oh, yeah.
And then a half-hour wait in line and starting your car every time to try to inch up, you know, that sort of thing.
Well, because if you leave the car run, in 15 minutes, you're overheating the engine.
Right. So I do not miss my ICE days, at least in Arizona. Ronald Lecter says, great repair business for Dodge dealerships service department. And he's talking about one of those previous posts.
Yeah, he had the previous post where Motor Trend was talking about the Model 3, canning it because it wasn't a stick transmission and didn't have the engine sounds.
And then Niels is saying, I think Tesla's plan is to have a central assembly area, but with smaller assembly lines radiating out from that area.
Niels, I think you're right on that. I don't have a lot of the details, but it's if implemented, it's going to be revolutionary, and it'll be a new thing that has not been tried in over 100 years.
But his next comment is a good one. He says, we're talking about that U9 without the windshield. He says, well, rocks and dead chickens have to be deflected too. Someone must be mad.
Dead chickens, sure, sure.
You know, I used to ride my motorcycle. I'm sorry, folks, without a helmet. All right. I know it's irresponsible, and, you know, you could go on and on about that. But I got hit in the head with a bumblebee one time, doing about 60 or 70 or so, and it near knocked me out. It was that potent a smack in the forehead. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, I can only imagine what a rock would be like when you're doing 200 miles an hour. I don't think you'd survive that.
I don't think you'd survive that either. Well, and, you know, and I was talking to a friend yesterday about, you know, I spent my time in high school in Alaska, and my family's up there, and their comment was, you know, Alaska is the one place in the world that when you see moose crossing, you better take it seriously because you're going to see some moose.
Really? Yeah.
And I think about that. If somebody had that BYD in a summertime in Alaska driving, and there is nothing to stop any animal from just coming up and taking your head off as you drive by if you hit them.
Wow. You know, back east, we used to have deer accidents, right?
Uh-huh.
And they'll crumple the front end of a car pretty badly. I can only imagine what a moose would do.
We, while I lived in Alaska, there was one instance where it was a Chevrolet Geo, so those little subcompact car.
Yeah.
The Geo hit the moose. The driver was seriously injured. The car was completely totaled. The moose got up off the car and walked off.
No way.
One of the few instances that I've ever heard that the animal got in a tangle with the car and the animal won.
And probably swore at him as he walked away from the car.
I think he probably did.
Why don't you watch where you're going? You would think that as tall as they are, that you might be able to go under their legs or something, or kick them out and it rolls over the top. But yeah, that would be.
It would be. Niels has another one for us. He says, well, maybe it's meant for indoor driving.
Hey, good point. Yeah.
Maybe it is.
Welcome, Highlander. He's joining us. He said, this is what happens when you walk in the middle of a conversation. Lots of laughs, the Highlander. Yes.
Yes.
And K.A. Panda says, back east. What do you mean? Rochester, New York, upstate New York, and finally ended up moving down into the Finger Lakes region, Bristol, New York, where the ski lodge is. Beautiful country, very green, of course, and rolling hills. But 4 seasons, and we wanted to get out of there. No more snow.
Yeah, he says he's in New York Metro. He says, are you a Yankee? You a Yankee fan?
Yes, I guess I could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, so here's a headline. Rivian lays off workforce for the second time in 2024. Earlier this week, they say Rivian announced plans to lay off 1% of its workforce. Doesn't seem that, it's not like 10%. With 140,000 employees, 14%, 14,000 people had to be let go. So 1% of its workforce. They explained that the second round of job cuts will reduce costs during a slowdown in EV demand. Again, they said it was a difficult decision to make, but one that would assist with the goal to become gross margin positive by the end of the year. So there's good news for investors. I know it's a goal, but if they can actually pull it off, they weren't that far away compared to all the other EV manufacturers. I think these guys were the closest to turning the corner.
Yeah, they've made several changes this year to really focus on the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
They've paused the construction on their big factory in Georgia. They did a 10% layoff earlier this year. They had about 16,500 employees. So they dropped their headcount to about 15,000. This additional 1% probably comes up to about 150 employees or so.
And I hope RJ Scaringe watched our YouTube video that we released about 3 months ago or so, which was a personal message from me to the CEOs. If your companies are not cash flow positive, let's suspend the private jets, the houses overlooking the Pacific, the lavish pay and compensation packages until we've got profitability. And I have not heard anything about RJ falling into that pitfall of being accosted for lavish expenditures and all of that.
I have not heard that either, and I think that Rivian is simply understanding the environment and acting appropriately.
Hmm.
They're trying to make sure that they know that being successful takes two things. It takes sales on one side, but it also takes cost containment. And now that they see that demand has plateaued, they're going and putting a lot more force into the cost containment part of their business as well, as is Tesla.
Such a simple philosophy. If you spend less than you make, you'll always have money.
Yeah, very simple.
So they say this is the second layoff at Rivian. It was a 10% layoff of its salaried workers. And that was this year, actually. All right. And it was to optimize cost efficiencies, as we said earlier.
The one thing that a multiple rounds of layoffs in a company can do, Tesla's going to be dealing with this, Rivian's dealing with this. You have that psychological effect of somebody was fearing for their job with a round of layoffs, and then they breathe this sigh of relief. Okay, I survived.
Mm-hmm.
Now the next thing you know, layoffs are announced again. And it does create an environment, a hard to work in environment where some people have trouble handling the pressure.
Yeah. I'm fully aware of that with the Motorola experience here in town. They were a defense contractor, and we used to repair their computers, their mainframes at the 52nd Street plant. And it was very common that people were terrified constantly because they never knew when their number was up. But, let's also remember that those types of layoffs take place. But then also when a company is forced to cut staff, they usually look at the weak performers.
Yeah.
So there's a strong motivation there to do a better job, to shine, to impress your employer.
Well, and what I think with Rivian is that, 10% first time around, that's kind of an across the board cut. Everybody's going to feel some pain. That 1%, that's where RJ is going to his managers and saying, okay, it's time to cut some dead weight.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because you can get 1% out of the company and not even feel it if you're really looking at the low performers.
Yeah, and they gave some numbers here. There were 20 laid off in the battery cell development area, for example, and that was in December. But yeah, you're right. I think it's oftentimes it's perceived as a healthy culling, pruning activity, which shouldn't really terrify investors. I think that any company willing to make adjustments is a responsible company.
In fact, I think that's one of the reasons Rivian stock has actually been up off of their all-time lows this week is because of this announcement.
Right. Right. A few more comments there. Oh, no, I guess we caught all those. All right. David Habasi pointed on LinkedIn, and he is a Tesla guy. And he says, I know I sound like a broken record to some of you, but this is a huge, huge deal. And what he's talking about is Tesla's move into, in fact, we have a video here, Jesse. I think I posted it out here. No, I guess I did not. The switch from manual driving cars to full autonomous cars. And what Elon is saying here is when you have several million cars suddenly go from manual driving to autonomous driving, it will be the biggest asset value increase in history. Because remember now, cars no longer have to go to service centers, dealerships in order to be upgraded, have modifications, have recalls handled. A lot of this stuff is done over the air.
Right.
Updates directly into the Linux computer in your Teslas. He says that cars usually are used about 1.5 hours per day, probably commute time, maybe some shopping thrown in. And then they sit in parking lots or garages. With autonomous use utilization, it can climb to more like 50%. What we're talking about here is actually using your car to generate income.
Right. Kind of like Turo does right now, except that with the autonomous car, you always know where your car is at.
Mhm.
It's a very intriguing concept, and a lot of people are going to have to catch up to the idea.
Mhm. Very much so. And then, of course, the final ingredient here is another major game changer in this disruptive, process. Safety will increase tenfold, he predicts, or in my estimation, even more, since the machines are far better pilots of these vehicles.
Yeah. The time that it takes for a computer to look at a situation, recognize what's going on, and react, maybe thousandth of a second, maybe a few 10,000ths of a second.
Millisecond, even.
Yeah, maybe a millisecond or less. And the time, even the very best human being to see a situation and be able to react to it is going to be somewhere around 1500ths of a second to as much as a quarter of a second or 2500ths of a second. Well, you just look at that and you realize, wow, that's a huge difference.
And that's, of course, making the assumption that people are engaged and connected to driving,
Yes.
which is definitely not the case anymore. Cell phones are a distraction, the dog barking in the back seat, turning around, whatever it is, or just plain daydreaming while driving. My wife and I, we had two grandchildren with us, the 7-year-old and the 1.5-year-old in the car. We were going south on Cave Creek here.
Okay.
And my son Tom, who had delivered a picnic set over to a Gruber Motor Company, was behind us, but he missed the light. So he was about one light behind us, and we were up in front. He called us at one point, and he said, "You guys just missed an accident seconds ago." And it was only because we were up in front. We probably would have been involved.
Wow.
But it happens that quickly and that rapidly with two little kids in the car. So personally, I'm looking forward to machines doing the driving at some point in time. I'd still like to have the wheel occasionally, but I'm going to feel much safer on the road when the machines are doing it rather than human beings.
Well, you've also got the machines and their ability to communicate wirelessly with all the cars around them, with the lights in an urban setting, with the stoplights. You'll have the stoplight that has the green in front of you, but you don't if you don't have the walk or don't walk signal flashing, not a big deal anymore. And because they'll communicate with all of the inanimate objects around them as well as be able to see what's going on with the live objects.
Sure. They're already burying this in some cars, accident prevention. I know the Arcadias, for example.
Yeah.
If you tailgate or get too close, the seat begins to rumble and you feel it.
Yep.
Well, as AI enters the cars, it's going to be able to predict what is occurring and potentially prevent accidents. There is a red light runner on your right that is about to come through that intersection. My GPS is telling me that,
Yeah, because
Caution.
the GPS will see that guy is coming around on the right-hand side of the semi-tractor trailer that's parked there at the
Right.
red light that you cannot possibly see.
Right.
I am looking forward. I admit, on my way home, my car is not as smart as some of these other smart cars because I was on my cruise control and my car hit the brakes because the truck 2 lanes over, the tractor trailer rig 2 lanes over, was casting a shadow into my lane and it confused my car.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's a thing, and so I'm going I don't know 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. He's going 5 miles an hour under. The next thing I know, I'm going his speed. Thankfully, there was nobody behind me,
Right.
so I had to turn off the cruise control, get back up to speed, and go.
Right.
But with full self-driving, that would never happen.
So according to David Havasi, he says that, Elon is definitely onto something here. And he says, we are now in the midst of another major transportation revolution from Tesla. And he says, I cannot scream this from the rooftops enough.
Yeah, even China is beginning to realize that this is a for-real technology because Tesla's stock has been up almost 20% this week at times.
Yeah.
And it's because they approved Tesla's full self-driving in China.
So another headline just hit. It was Tesla may be laying off more of its global workforce after laying off 10% just recently. And the entire Supercharging team, for example, and the executive responsible for negotiating NACS adoption across the industry are being let go. And it shortened Tesla also shortened production shifts at the Gigafactory Texas and cleared out several teams associated with critical projects there. And of course, everyone was aware that that 10% reduction took place. But the rumors currently, and of course the rumors, is that the numbers eventually could involve 20% of the company's workforce. And at least according to this article, they say we've seen other signals that layoffs may be coming from an anonymous source and no specific tips. So the again, this may be a healthy process that Tesla is undergoing, making adjustments.
Some of the adjustments that have been talked about in the press, to me, are kind of a head scratcher. Really, your entire supercharger team gone?
Yeah.
That we've talked ourselves about how supercharging is one of the areas where Tesla is going to be able to rule the world because they've got a better product. Yet at the same time, in a different conversation I was having with another friend just this week, they were talking about business opportunities for charging and infrastructure and stuff like that. And they said, look, they're knowledgeable, they're in the industry, and they said right now nobody's making money. Not Blink, not ChargePoint, not EVgo, not Electrify America, and not Tesla. They said nobody's making money yet. And in the industry, the common belief is that they're about 5 to 7 years away from any of these charging stations being profitable. That blew me away. So
Yeah.
maybe there is, maybe it's that. If you're not making money, you get rid of the dead weight, even if it's a critical thing like supercharging.
Now, is it possible that because of the costs of creating infrastructure, it would be like there are no gas stations and suddenly you have to build them all that bricks and mortar, and wait for the revenue to catch up?
I think that's going to be part of it. I can't imagine that it's not. And we've got $350 billion in federal money, of which a few tens of millions of dollars have been spent toward infrastructure and EV infrastructure especially. So there's great opportunity out there, but I just get the feeling that people haven't completely figured out how to turn that opportunity into dollars and cents for the bottom line. And it's my own speculation, but maybe that's what's going on here. It's that Elon said, okay, we are cutting costs. Supercharging team, you haven't been profitable yet. We're going to let you go.
Yeah. Let's just hope that Tesla doesn't take away the free supercharging for life. There are a lot of us out there that have those 2012s, 13s, and 14s enjoying the free fuel, basically. R.C. Robinson's Sons joining us. Full self-driving is going to save so many lives. Fully agree.
Yes.
Neil says collision protection is not full self-driving. Remember, neural nets will always fail catastrophically now and then, no matter how good it gets. Also unclear if how many will want it. It's on the cost too, yeah.
Yeah, Niels, your point about how many will want it is probably going to be one of the main salient points that determines the success ultimately or failure ultimately of full self-driving. If 1 in 10 people get it and nobody else will want it over that 1 in 10, then it's going to be harder for it to be successful.
If you can scoot up just a little bit, Jesse, there was a comment there that I missed. I jumped one. A little bit more. Yeah, keep going. Just above this one here. Yeah, here we go. K.A. Panda says, agree. Only Elon sleeps on the factory. Gotta like his South African tough childhood. Think R.J. Scaringe, the CEO of Rivian, growing up tinkering with his Florida garage, FLA garage?
Yeah, Florida,
was also grounding. They both have grit. Henrik Fisker, not so much. Well, we've got a Fisker update here for you, which thank you for leading us into that.
Yeah.
Fisker this week warned employees on Monday that they could be laid off in 2 months if the company's facility could close if the company is unable to course correct, and the company's facility could close. Of course, they went on to say they're diligently pursuing all options to address operating cash requirements, still looking for a rich uncle, basically, somebody to take over the company, buy the assets and the liabilities. But they say there is a possibility, however, that these efforts will not be successful. Well, I was kind of puzzled why the timing of this announcement, since it's been in the news all along, and then I figured out what's going on here. Apparently, this memo to the employee regarding potential layoffs was sent to be in compliance with the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, which requires companies that have more than 100 workers to provide 60 days of notice before a large-scale layoff or plant closure.
Okay. So they're complying with legal requirements,
Correct.
and hopefully people will get the memo and say, well, I guess we probably better be looking.
Yeah, and we complied. They said that the date would be effective June 28th, and Fisker's facility will be closed at that point unless some other options emerge during the restructuring. Now, of course, the big concern here is, and we're hearing this from Fisker owners as well, Fisker owners are worrying what will happen to their EVs if the company goes bust.
Yeah, that's a fair question.
And of course, the typical path for a customer that has one is they either dump their cars, which they've started to do already,
Yep.
in anticipation of there may be spotty support available. And let's remember that if the support now shifts to independents like us, we don't have bricks and mortar all around the United States. So how does a customer in New Jersey with a problem, avail themselves of expertise that we may have to repair their car?
And that's a really legitimate question, because you've got a car that when new was worth, with Fisker's reduced prices, $27,000.
Right.
And are they going to pay $4,000 for transport to and from New Jersey, and another maybe $3,000 or $4,000 for a repair on a car that itself is only worth 10?
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, we got about 3 minutes to run through these questions.
All right, I think we're at the close of questions here, Jesse. So we got a few.
We have a couple
We have-
questions
we have
here.
a few.
K Panda says, please tell us what car got confused by a shadow. It was my 2015 Model S with autopilot. Sometimes when I turn on the cruise control and don't turn on the autopilot, it will get confused because the autopilot went visual. And in the afternoons, I get that shadow across my lane, and it doesn't see the truck next to me, and then suddenly does and slows down.
We need AI with shadow recognition.
Yes, we do.
90 seconds.
Steve says, how do you feel about the first-gen Model X 2016 to 2018 these days? It was a noble design effort. In the Southwest here, it doesn't fare well because the sun heating up the door will make it malfunction. But again, it was a cool car. Is a cool car. Gull-wing doors go up and down. It does a light show. It plays music. All of that.
Niels also says, FSD will be commoditized over time. Everyone will have something similar eventually. Prices will eventually be near zero, and then everyone will just assume that it's there, like oxygen in the air. StoreDot is getting closer to being in production cars, and that will help EVs. I agree with him.
Mhm.
Eventually, the price will come down to a point where people will just say, well, of course we do it. It's a safety feature.
Right.
Highlander, you did not miss the commercial. We'll see if we can get to the commercial for the sunglass cases in our next show, which is coming up in 5 minutes.
Because Jesse is a firm taskmaster, and he says we're out of time. How many seconds do we have now, Jess?
Well, we got the people waiting on the Roadster show, so we got to be on time. It's at 11 o'clock.
11
You guys can
o'clock.
join us here in about 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah. Again, same YouTube channel, Gruber Motor Company, Gruber Motors. And we'll do the Tesla Roadster. Always a pleasure having you join us. We'll see you next week.
Take care.